All right, folks, we'll head back to court in just a moment, but first I want to bring in our guest for this hour. Joining us to discuss is former prosecutor, criminal and civil defense attorney Randolph Rice. Randolph, great to see you. Thank you so much, as always, for being on the program. First and foremost, I have a question for you regarding what we've been seeing this afternoon from the defense. They brought in a couple of experts, and I think it's fair to say that the conclusion that they're presenting to this jury is that the right result for any autopsy or any determination as to the cause of death of this victim is undetermined. So my question for you is undetermined enough to create a reasonable doubt?
But I think you just said it, Michael, perfectly, is that undetermined equals the doubt, the reasonable doubt that the jury has to come to the conclusion of that the defense is now pushing. So they are putting the idea that there is just no way to say with certainty. And you need that certainty beyond a reasonable doubt, obviously, to say, hey, look, the insulin is what caused the death of Michael Cochran.
Do you think it's going to stand, Randolph? During the cross-examination by the state, I thought they did a fantastic job of kind of explaining why the state came to the determination that they did in terms of charging Natalie. The fact that all the totality of the circumstances, the text that seemed to be setting up alibis, the missing facts in terms of the stories that she told, why she would have wanted the insulin, all these other things create the idea that that's the best choice, that this is what happened here. You can forget about all the other things that it might have been. We have enough evidence to suggest it was the insulin. Do you think they did a good enough job on cross?
Well, I think you used the word, you hit the nail on the head with the word totality. It's looking at the big picture and saying, with all these little points, with all these little circumstantial pieces of evidence, looking at that big picture, the totality of it points back to her as being the individual that caused his death. Now, personally, I think the state has a little bit of a problem here. I think that there's not enough connection there. There's too many other outside factors like the drugs from Mexico and all the supplements and the behavior and the medical issues beforehand, which places that doubt in the minds of the jury.
Yeah, that really does muddy the waters for them. They're trying to sort of, undermine that a bit, but I'm not sure they've been as effective. There are a couple of bad facts out there that I think the defense in their redirect wanted to address, and I thought they did a pretty good job of it. Number one is that insulin is not really the best choice if you're going to kill someone. It can be tested for. It's not something they test for automatically, but it can be tested. And also the fact that she never asked for an autopsy, I thought that was a bad fact. But at the end of the day, they said, look, she could have easily asked for a cremation, and she didn't. What do you make of there, trying to sort of undercut some of the arguments they know are going to come from the state?
Yeah, what the state is saying is that all these actions that she took after are an indication that she was the one who caused the death. But then the redirect by the defense really hit a great point in saying, if she was trying to hide this as a murder, why did she not cremate the body? Because if she cremated the body, as the forensic pathologist testified to, there would be no evidence for them to go back and be able to test for insulin or whatever else there might be. So it's the state selectively saying, oh, well, look at these points here. They're all incriminating, but don't focus on the fact that she didn't try to get rid of the body.
Yeah, and I think you go back to some other things, too. This idea that she would ask a friend for the insulin, which, in essence, is the murder weapon, then call a bunch of friends over to help her out. You can't say that might be all part of an alibi, but, again, does it make sense? And you'll have to go to your sense. All right, Randolph, stand by. We're going to go back into court now for day 7 of testimony in the Ponzi Scheme Murder trial in West Virginia. The expert witness. So for all intents and purposes, the evidence is in the case against Natalie Cochran. The state will be calling one rebuttal witness, which, as you heard, could take between 45 minutes and an hour. Let's bring back in our guest, still with us, former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney now, Randolph Rice. Randolph, we heard the decision has been changed. We thought all this time that this defendant was going to take the stand in her own defense. Many of us questioned it, whether that was the right choice, considering what we've seen as far as the case goes. She ultimately decided she won't be taking the stand. Your thoughts?
I think it's a great move on the part of the defense because, remember, your defendant testifying opens up the door to the prosecution asking her a million questions about what she did that day, what she did leading up to that day, what she did after that day. And it really can be a dangerous situation to put a client or defendant on the stand. I think what the defense has said at this point is, we don't think the state has proven this case, and we're not going to take a risk of placing our client on the stand and getting caught behind the 8 ball of something she says it's ultimately going to hurt her.
When I look at this case, if you're looking at it from the perspective of the defense, really, there's not a whole lot for her to explain, right? Essentially, she's trying to say, oh, I didn't do that. Well, you know, how do you explain that? She just didn't do it. So telling that to the jury, I don't think helps them at all, because we know that that's what she's claiming. And I think, and I want to get your thoughts, that the strength of the defense case really comes down to this medical expert testimony. And I think they did a decent job, and I think just rolling the dice on that is the right way to go.
Yeah, here are a couple of my high points on the defense's closing tomorrow. I'm hitting the point that the first autopsy is not done until 7 months after, that there's no conclusion from that autopsy as to the cause of death, that the second autopsy is not done until almost 5 years later, and it is a stretch to say that insulin was the cause of the death. Not having the puncture wound when he comes into the ER from the needle, that's another big point. And then ultimately, I think I'm focusing all these medications and drugs from Mexico, and ultimately, you can't say with certainty the cause of death.
Now, if you're the prosecutor, what are you focusing on? What are you emphasizing?
If I'm the prosecutor, my closing is focusing on the inconsistencies and the behavior like you and I always talk about. It's not the crime, it's what you do after the crime. And that's what I would be focusing on as the prosecutor. Now, look, I'm going to hang my hat on the autopsy, the second autopsy, and say that, look, this doctor knows what he's talking about. He knows that the insulin was the cause of it. And also the level of I'm drawing a blank on it, but the level that he came in at, that 21 level when he came into the hospital, that's an indication that he had been administered insulin. So if I'm the prosecution, that's what I'm hanging my hat on.
Yeah, because I think the only problem I have here in terms of what this jury might do is that when you take the battle of the experts, you know, sometimes, and I hear this often, and Randolph, tell me if this is your experience, jurors they cross, you know, these experts, they kind of cross each other out. And then they're kind of left with the rest of the evidence. And if you just look at the rest of the evidence, and again, there's a big issue here with all this other stuff that he was taking, but a lot of the other evidence seems to point to the fact that something was done to this man, and she was the only one that could have done it. I've seen people be convicted with a lot less evidence.
Yeah, I think the experts do cancel themselves out here. I think that's a great point, Michael. I think that maybe the jury kind of tunes them out a little bit, and they're like, well, one expert's saying this, the other one's saying that. But at the end of the day, I think they look back at the behavior of the victim. Again, I think that the Mexico steroids, the supplements that he was taking by the handful that his children were testifying to, that he would come down and he would just, you know, he's shoving supplements in every day. I think that's what the jury's ultimately going to look at and say, you know what, there might have been something else that he was taking that caused his death here.
The last thing, quickly, Randolph, only a couple seconds left. The other problem I think people and the jury are going to have is the fact that he didn't know, and the motive in this case. I think that's a problem as well.
Yeah, but getting in his mind right before this death, that's going to be hard for them to wrap their head around as to what he knew and didn't know leading up to this.
All right, fair enough. Randolph Rice, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insights. Always appreciate it. Folks, stick around, because coming up next, we're going to